what's our plan of action here? And um, now I'm going to go to the Ukrainian situation. Um, Sergei Glaziev, who is now a prominent advisor to Putin and has been an absolute enemy of the British free trade system, and is currently the president of the Developing Custom Union Economic Cooperation Zone uh, in the Russian of all of the former Soviet republics and others, uh, uh, had a commentary saying that by the U.S. estimates, U.S. State Department estimates, the U.S. has spent $5 billion in Ukraine creating the opposition to Russia. That is an anti-Russian Ukrainian political movement. That's their figure, according to him. And if you count all the European Union and other involvement, it's huge. The amount of foreign intervention for the last 20 years has been massive. He reports thousands of NGOs handing out $5,000 to $10,000 here and there to all these young people who are then activated. And as long as it's anti-Russian, they get the money. Anti-Russian, anti-Russian. Okay, and so this is what's going on. This is the backdrop to what's going on. And now I'm going to read you something quite shocking. It's on the website, but it's quite shocking when I read it. Wait a second. Here it is. It was here all along. All right. Okay, sorry about this. Okay, now, let me tell you about Natalia Vitrenko. She joined with us in '96 in Ukraine. She was a leading socialist politician in Ukraine who is an economist. And she co-authored the call with Helga Zepp-LaRouche in '96 for reestablishing a fixed exchange system, or New Bretton Woods. And this was going on in the context of what I'm going to tell you next, which is the whole stuff with Clinton. But then she looked like she was going to be the runoff candidate for president against these British-controlled candidates. And she's fearless. She says exactly what she has no, and she's not corrupt. And there's a tremendous amount of corruption in Ukraine because of the influence. So, and she's spoken at her conferences, and when she looked like she was going to emerge as the number one opposition, potentially the president of Ukraine, she was massively attacked. There were hand grenades thrown at her party. She was partially wounded. Another person was more wounded, and it was made very clear that they weren't going to let her. And then there was vote fraud, and all kinds of things happened. But she's been in the parliament. She's been very active, and she's known for her uncompromising position against free trade and against the destruction of Ukraine. And now she spoke at a conference on April 15th in Europe of 2013. So this is like 9 months ago. So I'm going to read you her short presentation because this really gets at it. During the 2 days of the conference and today, we have looked very deeply into the crisis situation as one of global destruction. But we are not the only ones, we people of reason, who are preparing for the crisis. I am convinced that the strategists of the British Empire are also working on their scenarios and preparing for this collapse. Helga alluded to this in her remarks, referring to the threat of fascism. And the processes underway in Ukraine are not unique. In Latvia, Hungary, Romania, and I'm sure in Greece and Spain the same thing is going on. The economy has been destroyed artificially. The oligarchical paradigm has been established, with the drastic impoverishment of the population. And then everything possible was done to bring neo-Nazis into the political arena. This is very clear in the example of Ukraine. We had President Kravchuk and then President Kuchma. They listened to the IMF, they conducted reforms, but they continued to waver between Russia and the West. The West then brought Yushchenko into play. His father was in 6 different concentration camps during World War II. Well, that's patent nonsense because people did not survive even 1 concentration camp, never mind 6. At the end of the war, he went into the American zone. I believe that from that point on, his father was totally controlled. Then Yushchenko was assigned a State Department case officer who was to become his wife. Yushchenko became president not by being elected, but under pressure. Javier Solana came, others came, and pressured the court to make the decision in favor of Yushchenko in 2004. In the streets at that time, we had the Color Revolution, paid for by George Soros, Berezovsky, et al. Yushchenko becomes president. What is the first thing he does? He essentially rehabilitates all the collaborationists. Mines begin to be built in Ukraine to Bandera, to Suskovich, to these agents of the Abwehr. In Western Ukraine, the Nazi movement takes to the streets. Okay. Now, I'll go into who these guys were. We sound the alarm. We understand that this is even against UN resolutions, but Yushchenko, Timoshenko, and Yatsenyuk, the pro-NATO forces, are in power, and they pursue this policy. In the West, they can see that the South and the East of Ukraine are against such a scenario. So you've got the Western part of Ukraine in a different political space than the Eastern and the Southern part. And Yakunovich, then Washington agrees for Yakunovich to become president. Yakunovich makes his first foreign trip to Brussels to NATO headquarters. Timoshenko. In the West, they can see in the South and the East. Then Washington agrees with Yakunovich to become president. Okay, he's saying after all of this, they agreed to let the guy that was running against Yushchenko become the president, Yanukovych. So in the West, they can see the South. Then Washington agrees for Yakunovich, the current guy, to become president. Yakunovich makes his first foreign trip to Brussels, to NATO headquarters. Yanukovych allows the Nazis onto national TV. Within 6 months, the Nazi party Svoboda wins the elections to the regional parliaments in Western Ukraine. At that time, our movement came under heavy pressure. We were kept off the air, but the Nazi parties became more powerful. In the 2009 parliamentary elections, the Nazi party Svoboda entered the parliament and obtained parliamentary immunity, substantial state financing, and guaranteed airtime. They proceeded to hold their covenants without any obstacles. They marched through the streets with torches under the slogans like Ukraine overall, Ukraine for Ukrainians, glory to Ukraine, death to the enemies, stab the Muscovites, slash the Russians, hang the communists. This is a gross violation of the Ukrainian constitution because it's an incitement to ethnic strife. Nobody does anything about it. Money pours in from the West. For the so-called struggle against corruption alone, NGOs receive $400 million a year from Europe. They start beating up people demonstrating for other causes, anti-fascist, orthodox. We had to set up our own self-defense unit to defend our rallies. Several times already we've had to make citizens arrests of neo-Nazi thugs and take them to the police station. We would demand that they be prosecuted for impeding our political activity. The police immediately let them go, and they have orders from above to do that. That Europe would be unhappy with the violation of democracy in Ukraine if they touch these thugs. The government is doing nothing to stop this. Nazi propaganda is spread openly. Books by Dmitro Donsov, the Ukrainian Nietzsche, are openly sold in the parliament building. Yushchenko, before leaving office, issued a decree that only the nationals should be considered fighters for Ukraine's independence. By the logic of this decree, the Red Army were occupiers. Russia was an occupying force. Only the collaborationists are upheld as having defended Ukrainian independence. I filed suit against this decree by Yushchenko. Yanukovych could have repealed the decree, but he did not. I lost the case at the local level, the appeals court, and the Ukrainian Supreme Court, and now I'm preparing a complaint to the Supreme Court. My father fought through the war, so how could he be an occupier? There have already been films shown on Ukrainian TV about how Ukrainians greeted Hitler with joy while Stalin was a demon. The Red Army were occupiers. Then there are talk shows around these films in which young people shout out, "Glory to Ukraine." The Nazis cultivate soccer fans. There have been several cases during soccer games when at the 88th minute of the game a firecracker set off. This is a code for HH, Heil Hitler. HH being the 8th letter of the Roman alphabet. The International Soccer Association had to penalize the Kiev Dynamo Soccer Club, forcing them to play a game with no spectators. I wrote a letter of thanks to the president, Mikhail Platini, for being the only one to raise his voice against Nazism in Ukraine. Ukrainian Nazis have a headquarters office in Prague. They work directly with those in Poland, the USA, and Great Britain. I understand very well that at any moment passions could explode in Ukraine, and the streets will belong to the Nazis. Yanukovych is 100% puppet of the West. His father was in the Politsai, and so it turns out that all the people in power in Ukraine are those who hate Russia. And the fact that our population is dying out, and the fact that we are deprived of the ability to live together with our blood brothers in Belarus and Russia doesn't bother them at all. So she's definitely for the Eastern orientation of Ukraine economically. So they constantly go running to the U.S. Embassy. Therefore, what happens in the world will happen, and it will happen inclusively in Ukraine as the formation of a Nazi state. And I think that a Nazi state in Ukraine is a danger for the whole world. This is translated from Russian, remarks from Russian. Now, she said this 9 months ago at a conference. And now it has happened. They are in the streets, and the prime minister has resigned. They're not cracking down on him, and they're being backed by Senator Kerry and Victoria Nuland of the State Department, and the British and the Europeans and everything. And these are people that have a past association with Hitler. Okay. Now let me go into who Bandera is. Stepan Bandera, and the other guy that she mentioned in this thing. What was his name? Bandera and Suskevich. Now, Bandera group was involved in the massacre of 70,000 Poles in the western part of Ukraine during the war. The Banderas they had an army that worked with the Nazis against the Russians during the war, and that army and that organization continued on after the war. Because of the Cold War, they continued on underground under the Soviet Union. These networks continued being underground when the so when the wall came down, they were reactivated in Ukraine. They were promoted and reactivated in Ukraine. Now, the Suskevich was a general in charge of troops that fought with the Nazis in Ukraine. That's what's coming back. Now, they're very anti-Semitic, and they blame the Jews for the existence of communism. Communism is an evil thing that the Jews created. That's the popular perspective on that. That's the way they think about communism. They're violently anti-communist, violently anti-Jew, violently anti-Polish, and violently anti-Russian. Although they have a common tradition with, like, a common history with Russia, they're not. They all come out of Kiev, so the whole thing comes out of Kiev. So this is the situation now. Glaziev has in his article said that you're at the point now where Yanukovych is going to have to move to crush this whole thing. Now, if he doesn't act decisively to crush it, then the country will descend into chaos. And because of these divisions that exist between the West versus the North and South, there's going to be it's going to be a civil war, basically. And these guys are armed. These guys are well trained, well armed, and they if they take power, they're going to rule in the street. They're going to rule by fear. They're going to rule by thuggery and violence. So essentially, now the agreement that Ukraine did not sign, which was an integration with Europe agreement, included also an integration of their military into NATO, and it also included, and so the Russians offered Ukraine a better deal, and so the issue fundamentally that was the trigger point. But it looks like this whole thing was being prepared anyhow to be deployed, regardless of whether Ukraine signed on or not. They're going to bring the Nazis to power in Ukraine and turn it into a Russian, anti-Russian bulwark. Now, if you look at the map of Ukraine, the western part is. Then when you go south, it extends all the way across the top of the Black Sea, all the way across to literally to the steppes, and you have the area of Crimea, Odessa, all these areas. It extends deep into the belly of Russia, north of which is Russia, and were that to fall into the hands of anti-Russian elements that could be used as a staging ground for operations against Russia, including nuclear war, this is not something the Russians are going to allow without reacting. But that reaction then becomes the trigger. So this is where you're at. This is where you're at. And the Obama administration is going full blast into this confrontation over to Ukraine. Supporting, funding, Kerry at the Wakunda conference in Prague, in Munich. There's an annual military conference. At the Wakunda conference, he stood next to this guy, the boxer, what's his name, Klitschko, who is a boxer, and he's the guy being prepared to come to power if they can. So the current president of Ukraine is not putting up a fight against this directly. So what's happening is that all the military personnel are meeting separately on their own. The leadership of the military, there's reports that 100 of the top military leaders and of the police are meeting now to try to figure out what they're going to do, because it doesn't look like the president is going to do anything. He went to a hospital. So this is where the situation is at.
Is this hospital outside or inside?
Ukraine.
It's in Ukraine?
Inside, yeah. So this situation for the Russians is not something that they're going to allow. I mean, they wouldn't allow Syria to go, for Assad to go down. They're certainly not going to let neo-Nazis take over in Russia. So you have essentially a protracted civil war emerging in Ukraine, and with incredible consequences. And so now this guy Bandera is now being praised, and Sushkovich are being praised as heroes. Heroes, because they're for Ukraine. They're Ukrainian nationalists. They fought the Soviets, and they allied with the Nazis. and that made them the heroes. They were the true defenders of Ukraine. So if you believe that, then Russia is the enemy. Russia is the enemy. Russia is your historical enemy. Russia's always been our enemy, right? And while there's about 30-40% Russians in Ukraine, what are you going to do with them, right? These are ethnic Russians. They're not Ukrainians. They live in the Ukrainian proper. They are Russians. And almost all Ukrainians speak both Ukrainian and Russian. What's the big deal? They both speak both languages, right? So so this is kind of shocking for people because they didn't know this was brewing. Most people, I wasn't paying attention to this, myself. I mean, I'm supposed to know these things, but so it's very shocking, and we're getting this out everywhere. We're backing neo-Nazis to take power in a country in which the Russians suffered, the Ukrainians suffered, the whole place suffered during World War II. And people have to understand the Russian attitude towards the Nazis is not very, it's not like the ADL, where anti-defamation, where they're threatening to call you a Nazi. This is the Russians went. When Putin went to Israel, he told the Israeli leaders, look, you guys, you wouldn't be here if it wasn't for us. We the ones who defeated the Nazis. Don't talk to us about anti-Semitism or anything like that. We defeated them. We defeated them in the war, right? And the Russian, if you know about the Russian people, in spite of Stalin, they didn't give in. They mobilized everything they had. They fought and the Nazis got crushed in Russia. That's where they got crushed. They lost most of their everything there, and it was a war. It was a war that was just nothing much. The worst thing was to be on the Eastern Front if you were German. That was the worst. That was the worst thing. And the stories, like the Russians would import, the Soviets would import these people from Siberia who had these little white horses, and they were on fur. These little horses, and they would arm them with nothing, no guns, just knives, and they couldn't be seen. And they took out miles and miles and miles of sentry positions. It was terrorized the Germans. They could never see these guys. They would be on them and be over, and then they could move on to the next one. And this is, this war was something something we can't imagine. And people, the Russian people are not going to allow a neo-Nazi state in Ukraine. It's just out of the question. So it is a provocation for world war. There's no doubt about it. And as I said in the promo, Putin says that he can count 200 relatives of his families, of extended families, who perished in the siege of Leningrad, today St. Petersburg. And that siege lasted for 3 years. And they didn't give in. The Nazis did not take Leningrad. They starved out a good chunk of the population, but they didn't take Leningrad. I mean, you gotta get a sense of the emotion here we're talking about, And so these guys, they're building up they're playing on the problems that existed under the Soviet Union with Stalin during the famine that ran in Ukraine. They're playing on all of this, and they've been cultivating it for 20 years since the wall came down, and now it's coming to the fore. So now, why do we say is this a flashpoint for nuclear war? Yes, but it's not really a flashpoint in the sense that we're saying it's gonna go from one incident to a higher incident to a higher incident to a higher incident. You're going to reach a point where first strike becomes the issue. Who's going to go first? You reach a point where you lose control of the situation with this guy in the White House, and you don't know who's going to go first. and that's when you reach that. When you reach that stage, that's how the nuclear war will most likely occur. It won't occur. It'll be like you reach us a point of the inability to function, the inability to where you don't trust anything, where you don't trust what's going on, and all these things are blowing up. Everywhere they're blowing up, and you're not communicating. You can't communicate. You can't resolve it. It just keeps going, and you reach a point where the question is who's going to go first. That's how it will work. It won't work on the basis of this will lead up to a nuclear conflict, like the Cuban Missile Crisis, where you had an incident, then you had a missile crisis, and then you resolved it. No, it's something that will reach a point where it's a question of who's going to go first, and that's it. Now, here comes the most difficult part of what I have to say. Is that what the British Empire, headed by the British Crown, because all other options have been exhausted. Asia is coming back. They're investing all their worthless dollars in infrastructure projects, and they're coming back. They're actually developing. And everything's been tried. Global warming, terrorism, you name it. It's all been tried. Now you have a consolidation of a directionality. And now the last option is on the table. And Prince Philip implies that in his statement, that, if you don't do it if you don't do it population by humane means, in effect, it's going to be curbed by war. So we've come to that situation. Now, what's the importance of the 1 billion? Why 1 billion? Why are they want to go back to 1 billion? I mean, this is something I thought about, and so
It's not even 1 billion.
huh?
Not even 1 billion.
No,
Less
1
than-
billion is what they're
Less than
saying.
half a billion.
Some people say half a billion, but there's a debate around that.
I hope there is.
Well,
It stays that way.
prior to the industrial transformation of the United States during the Civil War, prior to that, the world's population was around 1 billion to 1.2 billion. So prior to the transformation of the industrial power of the world, starting with Lincoln, which really was when it took off, there was an industrial process going on in railway and other developments going on in the U.S. prior to that. But the defeat of the Confederacy and the unleashing of the productive powers during the war conclusively demonstrated to the world where the direction of the world could go. And that's what they've been up against. So if you go back to a pre-Civil War period of population, you're looking at about 1 billion, 1.2 billion people. So that's more or less, because that's the reference point of the Industrial Revolution. So now, would this group risk annihilating the entire human race in the hopes? Yes. That's the problem. That's the problem that you're having to communicate to the institutions and the policymakers and the general, whoever, the population in general, is to make them understand that is what they want. They want that result. And this is horrific. And it's something that is so horrific that it's hard for people to even think other people who claim to be human beings are committed to that policy. It's very horrific. Now, so that concludes the first part. Now I'm going to go to the second part, which you need to know if you're going to look at the third part. What are we going to do about it? Okay. Now, Lynn has had a relationship of great significance with two previous U.S. presidents. One of them was Ronald Reagan, and the other was Bill Clinton. And the network that LaRouche began a dialogue with and went with LaRouche's SDI policy, then had LaRouche organize a global outreach to get Europe, Japan, Germany, negotiate with the Russians, back channel people. So organize the whole thing. Because it was a somewhat strange idea for most people that you would use the collaboration for the development of technologies to knock down missiles as the basis for ending the Cold War and unleashing the scientific, re-unleashing the scientific potential that installs Kennedy. And we did this in the context of our Fusion Energy Foundation, which had a couple 100,000 circulation publication by the early 80s. And what happened was that Ronald Reagan, there was an attempted assassination of Ronald Reagan to put him in the hospital. It was very serious. The bullet came within an inch or two of his heart, and it was much more serious than people realized. And during the period of his hospitalization, essentially, he further lost control. Now, the attempted assassin, if it was, or the person who appeared to be the attempted assassin, there probably was something else going on as well, was a member of a family that was close to the Bush family, the Hinckley family. And people don't know this, but he was considered, crazy. But he was nonetheless the Bush family regularly had dinners and met with the Hinckley family. The Hinckley family were associated with the Bush family. So the Bush crowd, once the SDI was blocked by the Russians, by the Soviets, the Bush crowd decided it was time to get LaRouche out of the way. So the failure to assassinate him in '86, the plot to assassinate him was run through the Justice Department. The failure to do that led to his putting him in prison. Ronald Reagan could do nothing about it. Ronald Reagan stopped the assassination, but he couldn't stop the process of putting LaRouche in jail. And LaRouche went to prison. And it's a long story. That's not for here. And so LaRouche went into prison as his projection of the collapse of the wall, the collapse of the Soviet system was occurring. He went into prison in January of 1989. And he was in prison, and then we had a lot of problems. And then in January, 4 years later, in January of 1993, Bill Clinton was sworn in as president. And the very crowd that was working with LaRouche during the Reagan administration briefed extensively Clinton on the necessity of having LaRouche loose, running around. And Clinton was not necessarily pro-British for whatever his problems, whatever his faults. He was not from the wealthy family. His mother was a wealthy mother. He has an Irish background, and you know what that means. And he didn't really like the way he was treated in Oxford as a Rhodes Scholar. And he studied under Carroll Quigley at Georgetown University. So he had some idea of what the problem was. And he was a bright guy. He was not stupid. He had some idea, and he was told about LaRouche. And then in 1993, the discussion process was a channel for discussion was opened up with LaRouche through an intermediary, and that's been going on. So the British began to take note that LaRouche was a problem. I mean, that LaRouche was involved in discussions, and they began to take note that Clinton was not their boy. And at one point in the early part of his presidency, he proposed to Helmut Kohl to dump Britain as the special partner and make Germany the special partner. And this came out in this period. I remember when that happened. And that didn't go over very well with the British. So the British sent one of their elite a lead inside guy is a young man at the time by the name of Ambrose Evans Pritchard, whose father was E. Evans Pritchard, the noted anthropologist, and he was put in as um, the bureau chief of the Daily Standard, the Daily
Email? No.
no the Daily Spec. What's the
Telegraph?
British? The Daily Telegraph. I'm sorry, the Daily Telegraph. The Daily Telegraph. And so he used his position to run smear campaigns against Clinton. And James Carville did a press conference in '94 where he did a whole flowchart of the media food chain. It starts with Evans Pritchard in the British press, and then it appears later in the U.S. press, and then it appears later in the conservative U.S. press, and then it appears later in the liberal U.S. press. And so Ambrose Evans Pritchard was the point person for going after Clinton, and then they ran a whole operation on the conservative layers. They put this movie out, the Clinton Chronicles. They did all this stuff. It was a total operation, and they were encouraging people to assassinate Clinton. And I know because I was organizing the people that were being encouraged to assassinate Clinton personally. I was organizing those people. But anyhow, I'll make a there were all this stuff going on, and Clinton was in this dialogue, and he was following along the path that was normally the case. But one of the reasons they wanted LaRouche out of prison was so that because the situation with Russia was very critical, and the concern was that that the financial system was headed in the wrong direction, and that LaRouche would be needed to pull together an agreement among Russia, China, the United States, and other countries for a new Bretton Woods, a new fixed exchange system. And that's what LaRouche was organizing for at that time. We were organizing for a new Bretton Woods, a new fixed exchange system. And then there was a shift. The guy who was the nasty person inside the Clinton administration was Al Gore. And he was a partner in the U.S.-Russian partnership with the Prime Minister of Russia, Chernomyrdin, and together they were partners in crime. And all the looting of Russia was done through Gore and Chernomyrdin and so forth. And then when the bonds collapsed in '98, Primakov came in. So you have essentially the following timeline. Okay. And I'll go through this timeline with you so you get a sense of this. Now, Primakov had met with LaRouche earlier. Primakov was appointed Prime Minister on September 10th, 1998, after a failed attempt by British and international interests to reinstate Victor Chernomyrdin, one of the executors of London's direct genocide against Russia in the mid-90s, as PM, and put Russia under direct dictates of London-selected financial specialists Boris Fyodorov and Domingo Cavallo. Primakov appointed an economic policy team that was committed to reviving Russia's collapsed physical economy, paying back wages, and renegotiating the country's foreign debt while launching a Russia-China-India alliance and conducting crucial war avoidance diplomacy with Clinton. This is Primakov. On September 14th, Clinton, at the Council on Foreign Relations and related meetings later that week, called for a reform of the financial system in keeping with FDR's policy to limit swings in the economy, noting that 1/3 of the world was living in economies undergoing collapse. This was as the Star Chamber Monica Lewinsky thing was taking place. And then on September 23rd, long-term capital management, a major hedge fund collapsed over the Russia-related losses of their bonds. And Al Gore held a series of meetings on Wall Street with the likes of Edgar Bronfman, Hank Greenberg, John Corzine, Goldman Sachs, that is Steve Ratner, Lazard, D.E. Shaw, and others, promising to use his influence with the Russian mafia to assure full payment of the GKO bonds and planning joint attacks on Russia over anti-Semitism charges from the ADL and Bronxville Jewish Congress. September 29th, Clinton announced, together with Treasury Secretary Robert Rubin, of a new era in U.S.-China relations would be launched after several private meetings with Chinese Foreign Minister Tang Jichuan, specifically to collaborate on the global financial crisis. The whole banking system of the world was about to go under. In November, Clinton canceled his scheduled attendance at the APEC meeting in Malaysia, where he had been expected to pursue his cooperation with China and ASEAN in dealing with the global financial. Gore went in his place, uttering a disgusting diatribe against Malaysian Prime Minister Dr. Mahathir stand against the speculators and the IMF, and openly backing British agent Anwar Ibrahim's anarchist demonstrations going on in the street outside the meeting. Mahathir adopted LaRouche's proposal to make the currency non-convertible in the Asian crisis. So you had this Asian crisis brought on by a massive financial assault on all the Asian currencies. That was their way of trying to break up the drive for development that was getting underway. Part of which came out of a conference in '96 on the Eurasian land bridge, which Calder was a speaker at. The British had another speaker by the name of Sir Leon Britton, who was a EU commissioner, who said that you were not going to do this without, we're not going to let you. And so then New York Times author James Risen reported that Gore, who had co-chaired the Gore-Chernomyrdian Commission, or the U.S.-Russia Joint Commission on Economic and Technological since '93, did not want to hear allegations that Mr. Chernomyrdian was corrupt and was not interested in intelligence reports on the matter. Risen wrote that one secret CIA report went to Vice President Gore that contained what was considered conclusive evidence of Chernomyrdian's personal corruption was returned to the agency with the barnyard epithet scrawled across its cover. President Clinton was impeached by the House on December 19th. February 12th, Clinton was acquitted by the Senate, with only Republicans, but not all Republicans, voting for conviction. In March of 1999, Primakov's planned visit to Washington on March 22nd for a meeting of the Bilateral Intergovernmental Commission was upgraded to include a one-on-one meeting with Clinton, as well as emergency efforts to avert the NATO bombing of Yugoslavia. Chernomyrdian and Russian moneybags Boris Berezovsky visited Washington and met with Gore and others in D.C. and Wall Street. Israeli Prime Minister Bibi Netanyahu got Primakov to postpone his visit by a day, meeting with him in the Kremlin on March 22nd. While on the plane to Washington, Primakov received a call from Gore saying that the U.S. would not postpone the planned bombing against Yugoslavia. Primakov was forced to turn the plane around in mid-flight and go home. And then in April 23rd, Tony Blair gave a speech in Chicago calling for the end of the sovereign nation-state Westphalian system of national sovereignty and launched a campaign of military intervention for humanitarian means. So that was the beginning of the whole humanitarian intervention process. Yeltsin fired Primakov after Berezovsky. Chernomyrdian visited Primakov to tell him he was finished. The U.S. Senate passed the Glam-Leach-Bliley, we're adding Lewinsky Act, as it would be known, repealing Glass-Steagall. The House of Representatives, that was in May. In July, the House of Representatives passed the repeal. And then in November 12th, Clinton signed it. So they broke. Clinton should have gone public and said, yeah, so what? I got a blowjob, big deal. But instead, the thing with his wife was very disturbing, and he lied out of fear of the situation with his wife. So he lied about it to a grand jury, which made it much worse. But in this Lewinsky thing, this was a British-run operation, and there was total cooperation between the British, the Republican leadership, and Al Gore in the whole thing. And because of what happened, and because of the loss of that situation, the Bushes came in, and then Obama came in. It's because of that process. And we now have the result of that. And so the reason LaRouche is bringing this up is for a reason. And that is he wants people to know what happened. We know Kennedy was killed. That was a turning point. But the Lewinsky affair was also a turning point in the country. So now, what does this mean? What LaRouche is also revealing is that he was involved directly in the whole process of Russia-U.S. relations, and to some degree China, and that his involvement was at the highest level, and that for which reason that it was because of Clinton that he got out of jail. And then in the middle of all this, he had a very serious heart condition, and he ended up taking a very risky operation that for a longer period of time. But he had, but the level of technical expertise required for this required an intervention of the institutions to get him that level of expertise for his heart. He never has revealed that before, but he revealed it this time. So it's not just that he got out of prison on parole because of this, but because they wanted him to be alive. The institutions wanted him to be alive because of a certain capability that nobody else had, with a movement, with an intelligence capability, a cultural capability, and the fact that forces around the world, whether they liked him or didn't, knew where he stood. So he could be a point of reference. He was not somebody who budged. He was not somebody who was corrupt in any way. He was not somebody who could be swayed. So he was somebody that could be the honest broker and discussing policies that nations would naturally want to adopt if they wanted to exist. And so it's for that reason that he is still alive. Now, we come to the final part of what are we going to do about this? And what LaRouche did as a flank is shocking. To me, it's shocking. It might not be shocking to you, but to me, it's shocking. We had written the Clintons off because we found that Hillary, in her raw ambition, was playing with Goldman Sachs to set herself up to be the successor to Obama. At this point, she is not going to be the successor to Obama because we're not going to have a country to have a succession of. But anyhow, so what LaRouche has done is he's activating a discussion process. Obviously, there was some discussion before he went public with these things about his relationship to Clinton, because this is not something you're supposed to say in public. This is actually risky for him because it creates certain. He's crossing the line. You're not supposed to publicly say these things, but he's saying them now because he's trying to activate a process that will bring the Clinton personally back in as a factor. In other words, he's setting it up so that Clinton can be a pole of orientation against the nuclear war. And the situation is complicated by Clinton's personal circumstances. He has a wife who has some issues. And he has a daughter, his only daughter, married, is a hedge fund manager. And Clinton is known to despise his son-in-law. And his son-in-law and the mother have essentially gone to the bankers that Clinton hates. And so there is this kind of family issue as well. So will Clinton come out? Will Clinton move? Now, it doesn't have to be public. It doesn't have to be a public move. But Clinton has connections politically such that he could organize. He could play a role in organizing the removal of Obama at this point. And his wife's presidential ambitions be damned. And that's a flank that we've unleashed behind. And now the British are paranoid because they know Clinton is not to be. They can't trust him. And they know that he has a grudge. he has a real grudge against them, both from his early childhood all the way up through he knows who they are. I mean, he understands it. So the question is, will Clinton, with the country existence at stake, with nuclear war on the edge, already getting underway, will Clinton weigh in such a way that it'll activate certain forces that will create the circumstances for removing Obama? So that's very important initiative that LaRouche is taking as of last week. At the end of last week, he took it. I mean, this is a new initiative. This is a new thing of LaRouche, and so right now, this whole question that he laid out on the webcast is reverberating. Who's going to stop this process, like World War I, the Guns of August? Who's going to stop this thing? He's not going to be able to stop it on his own. We don't have the forces to do that. But we can activate, we can catalyze, we can create an environment where forces will act. Now, the problem with the Republicans is for the most part, is extreme. And there's a quality of combination of stupidity and insanity that go together. I'm not saying all Republicans, but there is a combination of insanity. So that's pretty much what I wanted to say. And I'm going to open it up for questions before Kevin. And then Washington agrees with Yakunovich to become president. Okay, he's saying after all of this, they agreed to let the guy that was running against Yushchenko become the president, Yanukovych. So in the West, they can see the South. Then Washington agrees for Yakunovich, the current guy, to become president. Yakunovich makes his first foreign trip to Brussels, to NATO headquarters. Yanukovych allows the Nazis onto national TV. Within 6 months, the Nazi party Svoboda wins the elections to the regional parliaments in western Ukraine. At that time, our movement came under heavy pressure. We were kept off the air, but the Nazi parties became more powerful. In the 2009 parliamentary elections, the Nazi party Svoboda entered the parliament and obtained parliamentary immunity, substantial state financing, and guaranteed airtime. They proceeded to hold their covenants without any obstacles. They marched through the streets with torches under the slogans like Ukraine overall, Ukraine for Ukrainians, glory to Ukraine, death to the enemies, stab the Muscovites, slash the Russians, hang the communists. This is a gross violation of the Ukrainian constitution because it's an incitement to ethnic strife. Nobody does anything about it. Money pours in from the West. For the so-called struggle against corruption alone, NGOs receive $400 million a year from Europe. They start beating up people demonstrating for other causes, anti-fascist, orthodox. We had to set up our own self-defense unit to defend our rallies. Several times already we've had to make citizens arrests of neo-Nazi thugs and take them to the police station. We would demand that they be prosecuted for impeding our political activity. The police immediately let them go, and they have orders from above to do that. That Europe would, what's our plan of action here? And now I'm going to go to the Ukrainian situation. Sergei Glaziev, who is now a prominent advisor to Putin and has been an absolute enemy of the British free trade system, and is currently the president of the Developing Custom Union Economic Cooperation Zone in the Russian of all of the former Soviet republics and others, had a commentary saying that by the U.S. estimates, U.S. State Department estimates, the U.S. has spent $5 billion in Ukraine creating the opposition to Russia. That is an anti-Russian Ukrainian political movement. That's their figure, according to him. And if you count all the European Union and other involvement, it's huge. The amount of foreign intervention for the last 20 years has been massive. He reports thousands of NGOs handing out $5,000 to $10,000 here and there to all these young people who are then activated. And as long as it's anti-Russian, they get the money. Anti-Russian, anti-Russian. Okay, and so this is what's going on. This is the backdrop to what's going on. And now I'm going to read you something quite shocking. It's on the website, but it's quite shocking when I read it. Wait a second. Here it is. It was here all along. All right. Okay, sorry about this. Okay. Now, let me tell you about Natalia Vitrenko. She joined with us in '96 in Ukraine. She was a leading socialist politician in Ukraine who is an economist. And she co-authored the call with Helga Zepp-LaRouche in '96 for reestablishing a fixed exchange system, or New Bretton Woods. And this was going on in the context of what I'm going to tell you next, which is the whole stuff with Clinton. But then she looked like she was going to be the runoff candidate for president against these British-controlled candidates. And she's fearless. She says exactly what she has no, and she's not corrupt. And there's a tremendous amount of corruption in Ukraine because of the influence. So, and she's spoken at her conferences, and when she looked like she was going to emerge as the #1 opposition, potentially the president of Ukraine, she was massively attacked. There were hand grenades thrown at her party. She was partially wounded. Another person was killed. Never mind 6. At the end of the war, he went into the American zone. I believe that from that point on, his father was totally controlled. Then Yushchenko was assigned a State Department case officer who was to become his wife. Yushchenko became president not by being elected, but under pressure. Javier Solana came, others came, and pressured the court to make the decision in favor of Yushchenko in 2004. In the streets at that time, we had the Color Revolution, paid for by George Soros, Berezovsky, and all. Yushchenko becomes president. What is the first thing he does? He essentially rehabilitates all the collaborationists. Mines begin to be built in Ukraine to Bandera, to Suskovich, to these agents of the Abwehr. In Western Ukraine, the Nazi movement takes to the streets. Okay. Now, I'll go into who these guys were. We sound the alarm. We understand that this is even against UN resolutions, but Yushchenko, Timoshenko, and Yatsenyuk, the pro-NATO forces, are in power, and they pursue this policy. In the West, they can see that the South and the East of Ukraine are against such a scenario. So you've got the Western part of Ukraine in a different political space than the Eastern and the Southern part. And Yakunovich, then Washington agrees for Yakunovich to become president. Yakunovich makes his first foreign trip to Brussels, to NATO headquarters. Yakunovich, Timoshenko. In the West, they can see, in the South, more wounded. And it was made very clear that they were going to let her, and then there was vote fraud and all kinds of things happened. But she's been in the parliament, she's been very active, and she's known for her uncompromising position against free trade and against the destruction of Ukraine. And now, she spoke at a conference on April 15th in Europe of 2013. So this is like 9 months ago. So I'm going to read you her short presentation, because this really gets at it. During the 2 days of the conference and today, we have looked very deeply into the crisis situation as one of global destruction. But we are not the only ones, we people of reason, who are preparing for the crisis. I am convinced that the strategists of the British Empire are also working on their scenarios and preparing for this collapse. Helga alluded to this in her remarks, referring to the threat of fascism. And the processes underway in Ukraine are not unique in Latvia, Hungary, Romania. And I'm sure in Greece and Spain the same thing is going on. The economy has been destroyed artificially. The oligarchical paradigm has been established with the drastic impoverishment of the population. And then everything possible is done to bring neo-Nazis into the political arena. This is very clear in the example of Ukraine. We had President Kravchuk and then President Kuchma. They listened to the IMF, they conducted reforms, but they continued to waver between Russia and the West. The West then brought Yushchenko into play. His father was in 6 different concentration camps during World War II. Well, that's patent nonsense because people did not survive even one concentration